Welcome to the Pastors Podcast. This is Pastor Scott, and Jeremy and Kristen Neiditch are with me today. Hey, guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Hey.
For those of you who may not, I would assume that most of you know at this point, but both Jeremy and Kristen work on staff here at the church. And why don't I just let you guys introduce yourself, kind of how you serve in your role at the church, and how long you've been here.
Yeah, this is Jeremy, in case anybody thought it might be Kristen.
Don't you love those those radio interviews where they interview somebody and you're interviewing two different people, and like every single time that the person starts talking, they're like, "Thanks, this is Jeremy." You're like, no, we know at this point. So, anyways, thank you, Jeremy, though, for starting us off, making things clear.
Yeah, I work at the church. I'm the director of family ministries here at the church, and I've been in that position for almost 3 years now. And we started coming to the church, and when we moved here from back east,
fall of 2014.
Yeah, wow, it's been 7 years almost.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we just our first week back here, we started coming to Cornerstone, and we've been here ever since. Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah. I'm Kristen, and I have obviously been going to church since the same time Jeremy has, so fall of 2014, but I work at the church as the communications coordinator. So all the emails, social media, things that get communicated from the church to you is usually done by me.
And actually, this is not what this podcast is about, but I think we should announce that there's a new website coming.
Yeah, that was a great time to talk about the new website that's coming.
There's a new church website that's coming in the coming weeks. Mm-hmm. Is that what we're saying now?
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, we're like home stretch.
Yes, that is coming out in the coming weeks, that has been designed and built by Kristen Neiditch. She's been working hard on this for months and months. Yeah. I can't wait for everybody to see it.
It's awesome.
It is awesome. It totally is. And you should say that. It totally is.
It's awesome. Easy to navigate. Lots of content will be on there for people to browse. So.
I'm so excited for people to see that. But that's not what the podcast is about, actually. As fun as that would be. We've been talking about, over the last few months, allowing people to share stories of what the last year has been like, how God's been working over the last year in their lives. It's been quite a year for your family as well. Not just the pandemic, not just your roles on church staff and trying to navigate. And I mean, Jeremy, we could fill a whole podcast with navigating children's ministry in a pandemic and everything else there. But while it's been quite a year in your family, because in the midst of all this, in the midst of this year, you had a foster placement. And so why don't we back up there and you just tell us a little bit about that story and how that all came about?
Yeah. I'll kind of chime in first, because to be perfectly honest, I didn't want to do foster care. Like I was pretty much against the idea of us being foster parents. Solely because I was scared. Like I know how emotional I can be, and I knew just seeing some of the other families' experiences in our church and whatnot. I saw what a roller coaster ride it was, and I honestly was not sure that I wanted to get on that roller coaster. But also observing all the families at our church that do foster care and that have gotten adoptive placements and all that stuff, the Lord really started just working on my heart and chipping away at some of the fears that I had, and unbeknownst to me. And one day I was like, yeah, you know what? I think we can do this. I think I want to do this. And so that was my kind of journey, even just leading into being okay with foster care.
Okay.
Being okay in the sense that we were going to be doing it. So
Okay. So before we get into the story of the last year, then Kristen, what was that part of your journey like? Were you guys on that journey together? Were you wrestling through things differently?
Yeah, it's interesting to see how the Lord uses us as individuals to accomplish. I think if both of us were against it, I don't think God would have ever really had that challenge to kind of like work in our lives to bring us to this calling that he's given us. But for me, really, our church, I think, has done a great job of bringing awareness to the need for loving kids in the system, specifically in Los Angeles, and just how great the need is to love kids that he's created, and who are coming from broken homes and broken situations. And so I think just through the church and understanding more and more the need, and I think the conversation between Jeremy and I really ignited when I was like, hey, we have an extra bedroom. Like, how can we use that extra bedroom? I think, we could use it to love kids in the city, and what that looks like through foster care, more than just even being a CASA worker.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I love that question, right? I love both the question from God's providential provision in your lives, and then saying, okay, wait, how can we use what we have? And God uses that to direct us. It makes me think of the passage in 1 Timothy 6, where he says, let the rich in this present age, he talks about being content and not haughty, but then he uses the phrase, and I've talked about it before, I think even on the podcast, but he says, let them be generous and ready to share. And that phrase, ready to share, just in so many different times in my life just resonates and challenges me and pushes me forward. But I love it because it's the type of heart, right? This is the heart of Christ in us that looks at an extra bedroom during a certain season and goes, wonder what the Lord would want us to do with that. Right?
Yeah. And it's so crazy because it's not like, oh, like we have this big house, lots of space.
No,
like, let's just fill it. It's like, oh, we have 800 square foot apartment. And we just so happen to have an extra bedroom.
But 100 of those is
we have an extra bedroom.
Yeah.
Like something could be done with it more
what
than
can we do with
just
that?
An office space for right now, or a throw-all kind of catch-all room.
Interesting. Okay, so that's some of the background over the last few years of this. And so then you went through the certification process. When were you finally certified?
In May or June of last year?
Of 2020?
Of 2020, yeah.
Okay.
Basically, when the pandemic hit, we were still in the process of becoming certified. And then when that happened, basically our agency, our foster care agency that we work through, are like, hey, let's speed this up a bit. And so it was like, okay, guess we're going through the entire process really fast now. So it was a few weeks, I think, really into the pandemic that it was like we were finally done.
Yeah.
And I think some of it was because they could do it virtual. So they weren't having to travel to all the different locations and spacing out their appointments. They could do them back to back to back.
Interesting. Okay. And then about a year ago, a little less than a year ago,
you
got a call? A little less than a year ago, you got a call.
We got a couple calls.
Okay.
They were calling me, which...
And I wasn't picking up, so... No.
Well, I get so much spam, and I'm like, I guess I need to start answering all of these calls.
Every single call, yeah.
And the first one we got, they're like, we have a baby. Like, are you guys willing? And I said, my wife's in the shower. Can I get back to you? And let me talk to her first. And I talked to her, and Kristen's like, yeah, I guess so. And, when that moment hits, it's all of a sudden, every butterfly in the world is in your stomach, and it's so nerve wracking. And you're like, oh my goodness, is this about to actually happen? And so I told Kristen, we both agreed. And so I called them back 15 minutes later or so, and they're like, oh, they already found a placement for the baby. I'm like, oh, it goes that quick.
Mm.
Like, wow.
And you had just gone through this like 15-minute.
Yeah, it's like going
Crazy
to
roller
thinking
coaster.
about, your plans for the evening. You're like, what are we going to have for dinner? And it's like, oh, like we could have a newborn. Like we could have a baby, like just like
And
appear at our doorstep. Like,
yeah.
and then you're not thinking about what you have for dinner. You're thinking about like the next, few months, years. Like,
Yeah.
And half an hour later, you're back to what are we having for dinner?
Yeah. And then we got another call later that night for another baby, and didn't hear anything over the weekend. And I called and they're like, oh yeah, that baby we found a placement for that baby. And so I just realized at that point, I'm like, oh, this is not clean and cut, this process. And we got the call for Alexa about a week later.
Something like that.
Yeah, something like that. We got a call for her on a Friday, and at about 3:00, 2:30, 3:00 on a Friday afternoon, and she was at our doorstep at 6:00 that night with all of her belongings in a plastic trash bag, which was really hard to see that a baby just showed up at your doorstep, and everything that she has is in a plastic trash bag. It was just kind of surreal and sad, and you're kind of like, oh, this is messy already. Like it's tough. So I don't know that, and I don't know if you want to pick up the story from there, but that was it was quite the emotional day.
Yeah, I mean, I think the 3 hours was very like surreal. It's like you don't really have anything. Once again, you're like thinking about what you're going to have for dinner. And then it's like, oh, we have a baby that we have to care for. And, we don't have any bio kids. So this is our first baby, just like the two of us, and just trying to navigate that aspect of it. Being, usually you're like, oh, you have 9 months to prepare to like become parents. And it's like, oh, we have 3 hours. So
yeah, it was going to going to Target, getting baby things that, and
you're like they sell this, you must need it, so I should probably have one of those.
And I didn't know what I was looking for in
Yeah.
the baby section at Target, because I've
like
never walked in the baby section at Target.
You're like looking at all the diapers. You're like, which size is she?
Yeah, I didn't know diapers had number sizes, I was completely lost.
But that was funny.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit about Alexa?
Love to. So when we got her, we found out that she was, I believe, 6 weeks premature, 5 or 6 weeks premature. She was born, and had been exposed to some things in the womb, and so they didn't really know what how she was going to be, and I don't know, just over time as we got to know her and as she got to know us, we kind of realized that she's like a very happy, joyful little baby, very content little girl. And this is also probably important to mention, but when we got her, she didn't have a name on her paperwork. She was called Baby Girl, and that was her name for almost 2 months. We never got a name for her, and we kept asking, and they didn't have any record of her name. And that was a little rough. Like, you're starting to care and love this baby, and a name gives somebody identity, and you just want to love this baby, but you don't even know her name, and we weren't allowed to name her, and so yeah, Baby Girl, as she was known for the first couple months, was I think one of the words that I used to describe her is she's a fighter. She's strong. Like, what she has overcome already in her little life is amazing to me. As she was with us, she started doing really well on her assessments, and she was just meeting a lot of the expectations that they weren't expecting her to meet at a quicker pace. But yeah, she was a fighter, but she was just she is such a content and joyful little girl. Like, yeah.
Yeah, she was not one to cry often. So she was very, very happy and sweet. She was a fighter, and she had a lot of developmental delays that she had to overcome. Just, the little things, tummy time and like trying to get her to lift her head up, and was fairly delayed and rolling over, and us really working with her to try and help her meet those milestones that the doctors were wanting her to hit, and she did great powering through those.
Yeah, so sweet. And I know that you both just enjoyed her so much, and then as things proceeded through the summer and through the fall, I know your desire was to foster her, to adopt her, but can you tell us a little bit of how the hearings and everything and how the process played out over the summer and fall, and how there were, I know some surprises and things along the way for you.
Yeah, I think a word to describe it would be messy. Very messy, very much a roller coaster. You would think that they would kind of have somewhat of an idea in mind and communicate it to us, like what the process would be like, but it would ultimately come across like 1 week it's this, the next week it's the opposite. So, when she arrived to us, we were told that she had no like family, and that it was looking like it was going to be more of an adoptive case. And so we were like, okay, like preparing ourselves for that, like falling in love with her like over the weekend, and kind of having those set expectations that this was going to be a long-term placement. And then after the weekend was over, we were told, actually, she does have family. She has siblings, and she's probably only going to be with you for 2 to 3 weeks. And so we were like, okay, like adjusting those like things that you dream up over like the span of 3 days, and adjusting that to being a 2 to 3 week time frame. And then 2 to 3 weeks go by, and we hear nothing, nothing at all. And then those 2 to 3 weeks ultimately turn into a few months of just not hearing anything. And so you don't really know what to expect during that time. You're just kind of like enjoying her and kind of going through the process of just waiting. Then feel free to jump in if I'm missing something.
Well, besides the waiting, also just learning what it means to be a parent and how to love somebody unconditionally. And for me, the learning aspect was rough because I had no idea what I was doing with the baby. Kristen and I were taking shifts overnight every night. Like we'd rotate shifts to just, make sure she fed and whatnot. And there was times where I couldn't get her to stop crying in the early weeks. And I would like have her down on the floor or on the couch or whatever. And I like would look at her and throw my hands up and literally tell her out loud, I don't know what you want. I'm sorry. Like I had no idea what I was doing, but like you learn. And so that was part of the process too of waiting is also learning a lot in a crash course type of way, but
yeah. And then end of September, we went to go. Oh, before that, actually, she had a court hearing where, because it was pandemic time, everything's done over like phone. So like we call into court, kind of just listening to a bunch of legal jargon, trying to piece out what exactly they're saying is going on. But essentially we found out that there was a family member, and she did want to pursue having Alexa placed in her care. And the idea from that point was that they were going to start visitations with her to start moving on the process of reunification with that family member. And so we were waiting a few weeks to kind of hear about when those visitations would start, and we never heard anything. And so we were like, okay, I guess we're going to go visit my family in Arkansas.
And through all of that too, we had heard that part of the some of the reasoning was there were some concerns with this particular family member that they wanted to address. But that was pretty much the extent of it. They didn't get into detail of what those concerns were, which will play into the visitation process later on.
Yeah. So we go on this like 3-day, 4-night road trip with a 4-month-old, stopping every 2 hours to give her an hour of feeding, changing, playtime, then back in the car seat, and did that for like 3 days to go see my family so that they can meet her and get to know her and just like enjoy her,
which was really sweet. It was very it was special for her family to be able to meet Alexa and to spend time with her, and for Alexa to like spend time with them. And because unbeknownst to us at that time, like it wasn't going to be a long lasting
and it was really sweet too, because she had a ton of milestones all at once there. Like she lifted her head for the first time. She was able to roll over for the first time there, and so that was really sweet to be able to experience that with my family.
And while we were actually in Arkansas, where Kristen's family lives, we got a call from our social worker, who was telling us they wanted us to start filling out paperwork for like who we would have next of kin in case, if this continued towards us keeping her. So Kristen and I had actually started having those conversations, and everything was pointing towards, it seemed like this was going to be a longer relationship that we were going to have, and possibly like for a lifetime. And so we tried to temper our expectations, but at the same time move forward with the process.
Specifically being because there had been no progression towards visitations. And so it was like, okay, well, this doesn't look good on this family member's part, because the court said you guys could start visitations and there has been no effort. Yeah. So it doesn't look great for that reason.
So I want to, continue the story in that sense, but I actually want to stop and just ask you a little bit about what your relationship with the Lord was like in this kind of unknown, and like how are you walking through this with him?
I can speak for me that it was probably hands down one of the sweetest seasons that I've had with the Lord. Just such a closeness to him and such a peace with him throughout. Not to say that I never had anxiety or it never affected me emotionally, but there was just something about clinging to his character in that season and just truly rooting yourself in like, God is always good. His plan is always perfect. And he has a perfect, beautiful plan for this little girl's life. And we trust that he will not let, he's not going to let humans make the decision over her life. Like he's the one orchestrating it. And so I think those two truths of like, God is always good, he is always perfect, and his plan is always for our good, I think was just such a comfort. And just something I just repeated to myself over and over and over again, especially in the valleys.
Yeah, I echo that 100%. I think, and Kristen and I had probably almost daily conversations about the character of God, about his goodness, about his sovereignty. Mind you, all of this in the middle of a pandemic where there's so much lament and suffering going on around us and in our world, and all of the social issues that were and still are, issues in our world. And I was amazed at how much a lot of the valleys, like Kristen said, were just opportunities for faith and for trust. Not trust in the sense that everything's going to turn out like a fairy tale and for our good. Oh, it will turn out for our good, but like good in the sense of like
The way
we're
we
going to be
want it.
happy with the way the way that we want it to turn out. Just really having to trust in the Lord and his promises and his character, and also understanding that just no matter what happened, he was sovereign, and that we could trust in that, and that and I was also just amazed at how much I how do I want to say this? My biggest concern became her salvation. Like from the moment we got her, every single night I would pray, Lord, bring someone into her life, if it's not us, that will live out the gospel for her, will share the gospel with her, and Lord, prepare her heart to receive it. And I pray, I still pray every single night for her that God would use her as a vessel for his glory, and that she would do like extraordinary things for the Lord that I would never even dream would happen. So that was also an aspect of my relationship with the Lord, is understanding how sweet and lovely his salvation is and how much I want that for Alexa. So that was also part of my spiritual processing through it all too, was just desiring that, like I've never desired anything else before, and still, desiring it for her.
Yeah. And I would also say too that just together, that we have never prayed more together than during that season. And just like Jeremy mentioned earlier, just the daily conversations of talking about God's character and who he is, and rooting ourselves daily in those promises and in those truths. It was the only way to stay emotionally sane, was just because it was just so much of it was unknown.
That was the other thing, is you realize very quickly that what you think you have control over, you don't have control over whatsoever. And you desire things and want things that may not happen. And so that's where I was talking about God's sovereignty, is just, we had zero control over the process of this. And we had to completely rely on the fact, like Kristen said, that God was perfect and good, and he had a perfect plan for her life, and to know that he loves and cares for her far, far more than we ever could. And not only knowing that, but believing that. And it's a very humbling experience.
And I would go as far to say it's how I survived, like that whole season. It's how I survived.
So I think there's so many twists and turns to that entire season that we couldn't even begin to summarize in an hour. But I appreciate seeing that, just that reminder of the Lord as your rock, as your fortress, that I think sometimes it's easy to talk about, but in the midst, like it's the reality that doesn't only make us survive, but actually gives us hope and enjoyment in the midst. And I know that, just, I know, having seen that in you, it was such a joy and comfort. I kept feeling like powerless to even like know what to say or what to do or how to serve you, and to see the Lord just like, through people at different times, but really ultimately in him, was doing things that you couldn't create, that nobody could offer to you other than him, in such a sweet way.
Yeah. I also would say too that I don't think I and we talked about this too amongst each other, but I don't think I've ever felt more encouraged and loved by a church family than I did during that season. Just the constant, that sounds weird. I was gonna say the constant questions. It was a good, like, it makes it sound like it was a bad thing. It was a great thing. Just people praying for us and people coming up to us and saying like, oh, I prayed for you. I prayed for Alexa. Like the love that when we brought Alexa to church, the people that like just swarmed to see her. But yeah, it was just, I never have felt encouraged or loved by a church family like I did during that season. And that was another way that God was comforting us and giving us hope throughout all of the ups and downs.
And even too, like remembering like this was a pandemic, like we didn't see anybody. So like our church family was so intentional about reaching out to us and asking how we were doing, asking how she's doing, saying like, hey, I'm praying for you. Like,
bringing us food.
Yeah. Like, just the intentionality that our church family had to be during that season towards us when they couldn't see us was just so sweet. So thank you.
Yes.
So like I said, we do have to fast forward through lots of twists and turns in the midst. But when did you begin to really know that Alexa wasn't going to be with you long term?
That we were talking about that last night. That it's kind of complicated because of just the different steps in the process. But for me, I think it became a little bit more of reality when we started having to do actual visitations. And the visitations got amped up very quickly. The frequency of them, the length of them. And yeah, and to be honest, even the day she left, we weren't expecting it to happen that day. Because of things we'd been told. So, but yeah, I don't know. I think when the visitations amped up and then kind of towards the holidays, they were starting to say that, oh, this is probably going to happen. And we're like, okay, then that we're not expecting anything to change, but we know that it could because of everything else that's changed.
Yeah, I would say it was a gradual process and probably happened at different times for both Jeremy and I. But I think when they started mentioning doing overnight visits, that's when I kind of knew. Yeah. Because every time we've talked to them before, they're like, we're doing these visitations, but we have concerns. So it was like always with the qualifier of like, but we have concerns, and never knowing what those concerns are. So you don't know if it's as big as serious like, or something like super small. Like they just want her to like have a new like space for her or something like that. So we never knew what the concerns were. So I think that's what made it hard to never know when exactly things changed.
And then one day you got a call.
Well, the visitations were, I mean, there's a whole story there, but we actually, leading up to her last court date that we were a part of, we actually got a call saying that this was our 2-week notice, that she would be leaving in 2 weeks. They wanted us to have that 2 weeks to prepare emotionally, only to get a call the very next day saying, oh, we're rescinding the 2-week notice. And it's like, okay. And then, but that was about 2 weeks before her court hearing, and her court hearing happened to fall on Kristen's birthday, of course. And leading up to that court date, we were being told that there was a team, that was handling her case, social
like
workers,
12 people,
different social workers, her attorneys, all that kind of stuff. And we were being told that, yes, she was going to be going to her bio family, but they want it to be a longer process because they still had some concerns.
Yeah. And so this particular court hearing, we were told that DCFS was presenting to the judge that they wanted to start the transition process back to the bio family. So that was like the expectation going into this court
Yeah,
hearing.
she was supposed to have her first overnight that night. Actually, we hadn't done any overnights yet, and so we're listening to her hearing started about 11:45 that day, and we're listening on the phone, and all of a sudden the attorney had said, we don't we don't understand why this is taking so long. This transition, we don't see any reason why it shouldn't be immediate. And the judge agreed and ordered her to be handed over that day. And so it went from expecting this to be drug out for quite a while, at least a couple more months, to, we have to pack up her clothes, her toys, her books, her everything. We have to pack everything up and make phone calls to our parents so they could say bye on FaceTime. And about 3 hours after that court hearing ended, she was gone. So it happened so quick. And yeah, it was unexpected. We knew that there was a possibility, but the way it had been presented to us, we shouldn't expect it to go down that way, but it did.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, it was like so surreal just listening on the phone, like hearing DCFS like present their case to the judge, and then at the very end, Alexa's attorney being like, actually, I disagree, and this is what I present, and the judge being like, yep, I agree with you. Meeting adjourned. And then, waiting to hear back from the county social worker. And because we were planning on doing a visitation that night, they were like, oh, do you guys just want to go ahead and take her to that, and that kind of be your last meeting? And I was like, no. I was like, I can't do that. I don't want my emotions to overcome me and distract for the happiness that I feel for her family, and getting after all this time of only getting to see her twice a week for 6 hours a day, to be so sad for myself, to distract from their happiness and their reunification, and not wanting my emotions to be confusing to them. Aren't you supposed to be happy for us? And so we have a great social worker through Koinonia who graciously drove out to our place and picked her up to take her there. But
yeah, and we also found out that morning at the court hearing that she was actually mistakenly removed from this bio family's care in the first place and given to us. And it helped explain a lot of the distrust that we felt from the bio family during visitations. And it just made me really feel for them as well. As painful as it was for us, Kristen and I talked about how painful it must have been for them having to receive her for 6 hours twice a week and then bring her back, and relinquish her again to our care. And again, unbeknownst to us, we didn't know what the issues were. We didn't know that she was with them in the first place until later on in the process. We didn't know that she was mistakenly removed from their care because she didn't have a social worker at that time, and she kind of slipped through the cracks and wasn't assigned a social worker till a few weeks into us having her. So it was just an extremely messy process. But like Kristen said, we also did not want to get in the way of. We didn't want it to at all be about us in the handing over of Alexa. And so yeah, our Koinonia worker was extremely gracious to come last minute and take her, and that was a really, really hard experience.
Yeah,
it's one of those experiences that I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. It was such a it brought me back to the story of Moses and his mom placing 3-month-old Moses in a basket and leaving him in the reeds. And I just in that moment, it just felt like, God, I'm giving over this child into your care, and I have no idea what's going to happen to her or her life, and I'm just going to put her in this car seat and watch her drive away. Like, it's like a two-door car, the car seats are turned facing the back, and so placing her in the car seat and just telling her how much Jeremy and I loved her, and just handing her favorite toys in the car seat, and just walking up to partway through the staircase and watching her drive down the alley, like seeing her in the car,
till
just
we couldn't
knowing,
see her anymore.
Yeah, till we couldn't see her anymore, and it was like just knowing that that's the last time we would ever see her is just one of those moments that it was putting her in the car and just treating her like Moses or like Isaac, and just entrusting her, giving her up to the Lord, not knowing. So definitely one of the hardest, and something that I'll remember forever.
Yeah, I think, and to even kind of bring it back to how the Lord was working through all of this, we had been praying diligently for the social workers involved in her case, for the judge, for the attorneys. We had been asking the Lord to give them wisdom and to truly seek what was best for Alexa in all of this, not what was best for us, not what was best for the Bio family, but what was truly best for Alexa. And we prayed and prayed and prayed about that. And the decision came, and both Kristen and I, we agreed that even though it was the outcome was painful for us, and it wasn't what we would have ever chosen, the Lord was still faithful to answer our prayers. That what happened, like we trust, again, it brings it back to the trusting that the Lord was acting on her behalf and heard our prayers and answered our prayers, and to understand that the Lord answered our prayers despite it not working in our favor was so comforting. To know that our circumstances and our emotions and our thoughts are not the Lord's, and to trust that He was still doing what He had planned to do all along, and that He listened, He heard our prayers, and He answered them. And it just brought tremendous joy and comfort for both of us in that. Like it still hurt. Like I cry multiple times a week still to this day, and that pain is still there, and it's very real. But it's in a right place. Like it's in its proper perspective.
Yeah, and even in the midst of mistakes, even in the midst of, I'm sure I know a lot of questions about like, wait, why did it pan out this way? To see the Lord's, I mean, it's one thing to cling to Him in the unknown, right? In the uncertainty. It's another to cling in the midst of the certainty, when the certainty it can be so discouraging and painful. And that has been, I mean, it's not just a testimony of, and I know so many people, even so many people listening to this, it's not just a testimony of this moment. That's been a testimony that so many of us have had the privilege of getting to witness, as the Lord has brought that out in your lives and your hearts. And I'm just so thankful to Him for the ways that He's demonstrated that in ways that we couldn't ever put together ourselves.
Yeah.
What, I think sometimes, whether it's people listening, whether it's friends or even just people around you, I think sometimes people would hear a story like that and be like, "What? Why would you put yourself through that?" Right? Like, why? Like, they look at me like, "Yeah, that's why this. That's why I could never do that, or that's why this isn't a good idea." Right? Like that. It is messy, and people make mistakes.
I mean, that's what I was fearful of prior.
in the first place. Yeah, you're right. Look, my fears were like, I was right.
Yeah.
Right? I was right to be afraid of this. What would you say to someone who asked you, why would you put yourself through that?
I mean, the closeness to the Lord is just something that, unless you've truly experienced what it feels like to, well, I guess, you know how people are like, oh, like summer camp, like you feel on fire for the Lord. Like there's a closeness that God reveals himself to you, and the overwhelming comfort and peace. And so even though the situations are hard, you're not doing it in your own strength. And it's not because Jeremy and I are special and we have this supernatural strength that, we just gear up in ourselves. Like God pursues you in those seasons and provides the strength to walk through it with him together. And he reveals just this deepness about his character and his love and his perspective on like the world and for humanity. And so that's a little less like tangible, but there's something to have walked through a hard season with the Lord's strength that's just so sweet.
Yeah, there's like Kristen said, there's definitely some tangible reasons. One, just the need. Yeah, I think there's over 30,000 foster kids in LA County alone. The system was definitely broken, but aside from that, our world is broken. And these kids are put in this position, not because of a broken system, but because of a fallen world and because of suffering and sin and stuff. So those are definitely tangible reasons to do it. But I agree with Kristen. I think the relational aspect of my relationship with the Lord is overwhelmingly different than I ever would have experienced. We were meeting with our life group boys back in shortly after this happened, maybe like January, February. And we're nearing a year into the pandemic at that point, and we've been walking through the book of John with our middle school and high school boys, and we had gotten that week to the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, and the boys had been sharing just how tough it's been this year in the pandemic, and not being able to go to school, not being able to see their friends regularly. Especially at that age, it's tough. And so we were just letting them like talk on that, but we were reading the story about Lazarus, and something struck me in that story, that Mary and Martha had sent servants to Jesus, who's, in another town, to tell him that Lazarus was sick. And then the very next words say, 2 days later, Jesus went. And I'm like, whoa, like Jesus could have spoken and healed Lazarus right then. Jesus could have gone immediately, but it said that Jesus went 2 days later. And obviously by the time he got there, Lazarus had passed, and everybody was crying and everybody was sad. So was Jesus. He wept. But then he raised him from the dead. And it struck me that Jesus could have done those other things to prevent Lazarus from dying, but he also knew that they would not have experienced his power in such a mighty way if he had just done that. Like him raising Lazarus from the dead was an even greater thing than just healing him. And just, I told our boys, I'm like, this has been a really tough year, like pandemic and with all of the issues in our world. And I said, and me and Kristen were going through a really tough season too, like with Alexa and losing her and how painful that's been. And I had cried in front of them even a few times, and so they knew like how painful it was for us. But I said, we experienced the power of the Lord in our lives in a way that we never would have experienced if we didn't take this journey. And I wouldn't give any of the pain up for that. Like it made it all worth it to know the Lord in a way that I had never known him before and experienced him before, was something that made it. And aside from the fact that the relationship, that love that we have for Alexa and that Alexa had for us made it worth it as well.
Mm.
But I mean, nothing outweighs the power and the love and the comfort and the hope that the Lord provided for us in our season of lament and in our season of struggle. And to be able to share that with our middle school and high school boys was really special for me, because, you know, I don't know, they might have went and played a video game after that, but like,
just because they did doesn't mean it didn't actually leave an impact.
Yeah, no, it was really cool to share that with them, and to even over the course of the whole process, to walk through it with kids who that's not on their mind right now, you know, but to testify to the Lord and his power and his character is something that can't be matched, I feel like.
Yeah. So it's been quite a year. There was quite a difficult, unique, messy situation. Are you going to continue to pursue foster adoption still? And if so, why?
Yeah, so we just got reapproved for another year of being certified foster parents. And I think it's also really important to just remember that just in general, like when stepping into foster care, like the goal of fostering is reunification. Yeah. And then when reunification isn't possible, like, are we willing to to open our home for permanent placement through adoption? So we are still pursuing foster care. And then if the Lord wants us to, or if it's not possible for that child to be reunified, or they have no other like extended family, then we are open and willing for with joy adoption through foster care, and willing for that. But we've been on hold since Alexa left, just to give us time to grieve and process the emotions, and just kind of going through a season of rest, I think, is important too. Like, God gives us really hard seasons and then gives us seasons of rest. And so we've kind of been through a season of rest, and do you want to
well, I was just thinking about, we had prayed, and we prayed about it and talked about it, and felt that, you know, in June, mid-June, late June, we would go back on the call list. But the past 2 weeks, all of a sudden, we've been getting all of these opportunities presented to us, and
you're like, I'm not on the list yet.
Yeah,
how'd you get my number?
Yeah, I talked to Brian about it, and Brian's like, it's the no call list. Like, so, and Kristen and I we were talking about it a couple weeks ago about whether or not we should go back on earlier than June. And I'm like, you know, we prayed about it, and if the Lord wants to like open up an opportunity before then he will. Like, I don't think we need to pursue it. And of course, all of a sudden there's just been all these phone calls, which none of them have panned out yet, and we're okay. But we've said yes to pretty much all of them that we could. And so, we're ready to take that journey again and see where the Lord leads, and trust in him through that process again.
Yeah. And I will say it's been tougher. I think it is a little tougher knowing what we know now, to be like, yes, like, okay, I guess we're going to walk through open ourselves up to like another really hard season. But once again, I think just rooting yourself in the character of God and knowing who he is and what he's called us to, we know that he will fulfill his promises to us, and it's in that season.
Yeah. And it's not as simple, I think, as we're maybe making it sound, because there's definitely times where I'm alone with my thoughts and I'm like, what am I doing? This was the hardest thing I've ever had to experience, and I'm like willingly like walking towards that again. But then the Lord just kind of reminds you like that his strength is sufficient,
Mm.
and
And in the moment when you get the call, it's like, how could we say no to this child who's alone in a hospital with no one? Like, how can you say no, knowing that that child is on the other end, like needing somebody to just hold them and to love them and to care for their basic needs and their emotional needs. And we can provide that for them. So
well, thank you guys so much for your faithfulness. It has been such a testimony to God's power. I know you're both different people than you were last year,
that's
right?
for sure. Yeah.
Like the Lord is working, is changing, is transforming in so many beautiful ways that we couldn't even begin to, capture in just an hour like this. But at the same time, he continues to show himself so faithful, so glorious, so good, and so powerful in each little season. And I just want to thank you guys for putting yourselves in the position to allow him to both use you and also shine that glory in so many ways through you. It's been a privilege to get to walk in little ways and get to see that over the last year and over the last number of years, right? As he continues to unfold all sorts of different ways of your stories. And I just want to thank you both as a parent of kids that are invested in by you, whether it's as a junior church teacher or in the life groups. I know that your choice to lead life groups, your choice to invest in the kids, and your choice to foster pour forth from the same heart, but aren't necessarily related. But they're also powerful ways that the Lord is redeeming the fallen messiness that you step into by demonstrating that his power and his goodness, both to you, to our church family generally, and to these kids in my household, that it is such a privilege to get to talk with them about what they see, hear their prayers for you, hear their prayers for Alexa, and continue it. And for those of you listening, I would just ask you to also, would you just continue to be praying for Jeremy and Kristen? Would you continue to be praying for this next season in their lives? Would you continue to be praying for all of the families in our church that are involved in so many different ways in the foster care system? This is an ongoing journey with ongoing unknowns and difficulties and pains. In different ways, in different stories, I shed fresh tears this last week because these stories are still unfolding in many painful ways. And would you be praying for the kids in our city, and that the Lord would use us in just small ways, but significant ways, to be a part of his love, to be a part of his hands and his feet in our city for the kids that do desperately need that as well. So.
Yeah. And I would also add to that, like asking those and praying for those, all those things, but even listening to what God might be calling you to take a part in answering those prayers, whether that being looking at an empty bedroom and being like, what could we use this bedroom for God's glory, or being the one who intentionally reaches out to the families in our church body, and how they can help love and serve the kids.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you guys. Thanks for opening up your hearts and sharing this part of your story with all of us. And for just another reminder that the last year, I mean, we barely even talked about the pandemic and everything else going on this year, which really provided the backdrop, but to this story, but wasn't the most significant thing going on in your home this year. And we see that over and over, right? That the Lord's been working this year in all sorts of ways. And it's just such an encouragement to get a glimpse of how that has played out in your lives, in your family, in your home this past year. So thanks for sharing that piece of yourselves with all of us, and everybody else. Thank you so much for listening. Thanks for being a part of this family with us. Thanks for praying and for doing the little things and the big things that are the ways the Lord's leading you to be a part of these stories and the unfolding story of His body, His family here in our city. And thanks for listening. We love you, and we'll see you on Sunday.